So I'm just going to wait a couple moments here before I go through some of the accessibility, just to give people a couple of minutes to get into the room here. So welcome, everyone. One of the first things we're going to do here is I'll just go over some of the accessibility components and the agenda for today. So thankfully for a generous donation from the Calgary Foundation for a community grant, it's allowed us to have some great accessibility components for communications. So our meeting today will feature simultaneous English and French translation, ASL interpretation, LSQ, and English and French captioning. So please take a moment to adjust your settings as appropriate. What that means is you can select preferred English or French. It's in the bottom right-hand corner. You do this by selecting the interpretation option on your Zoom menu. Once you select this option, you will not need to change language settings again during the presentation. But you must select a language, even if you want to hear the presentation in English. If you're on a mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet, you can find language interpretation in the options under More. So for those of you who require ASL or LSQ interpretation, our ASL interpreters today are Carmen and Larissa, and our LSQ interpreter is Melissa Ann. We will be spotlighting those components throughout the presentation. We recommend using Zoom's speaker view to view the interpreters and current presenters. If you are using shortcuts, you can press Alt F1 on your computer to switch between these views. If you're using a Mac, you can do this by Command Shift W. To enable captions, select the captions option on your Zoom menu. If you would like to adjust the size and placement of these captions, you'll need to go into your Zoom accessibility settings. So to summarize our accessibility options, select your language using the interpretation option. Select speaker view, enable captions if required. And if you do have thoughts you want to share, put them in the chat box. The chat box will go to the panelists. If we have time to have some question and answer, we'd love to do so. But the agenda for today is first a land acknowledgement, then Margot from Voices of Albertans with Disabilities will speak. Michelle, and then Michael, and then Brent will share some information and conversation with us. So if we can support you at all through the presentation, if you leave a comment in the chat box, someone will assist you. And with that, I'll hand it off to Margot to go forward, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Andrea. And I would like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, the Métis, the Dene, and Nakota Sioux, and specifically the ancestral space of the Papaschiis Cree Nation. In Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations, Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and Stoney Nakoda First Nations. recognizing Treaty 8 and 10 territory as we honor and we acknowledge all of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have lived, traveled, and gathered on these lands for thousands of years. Hi, hi. The Canada Disability Benefit is an important step to providing people with disabilities the independence, the autonomy, and the dignity that they deserve. We encourage all parties to move forward with its design, introduction, and implementation without further delay, states Michelle Hewitt, Disability Without Poverty co-chair. We are so pleased that you took the time today to join us to have this conversation so that you too can put the pressure on your MPs and federal government to acknowledge the importance of this bill and move it forward to fruition. Disability Without Poverty Alberta and Voice of Albertans with Disabilities welcomes our three speakers. Michelle Hewitt is a disability activist in the Central Okanagan, BC, and currently she is the co-chair of Disability Without Poverty, a grassroots movement working to eliminate disability poverty in Canada. Michelle was a school principal until 2008, when an aggressive form of multiple sclerosis brought that career to an end. As she is now viewing life from a wheelchair, she is constantly struck by the inequities that disabled people face. Unsatisfied with the status quo, she works to advance systemic change as a volunteer with a number of disability advocacy groups. Michelle realized that the need to hone her activist arguments. She initially took courses with the Disability Studies Department of Ryerson University. With the fire of academia relit, Michelle is now pursuing her PhD at UBC Okanagan, where she is researching care options for working-aged disabled people with advanced progressive illnesses. Typically, this all takes place from her bed with the company of her Bernese mountain dog. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Margot, and welcome to everybody. I am coming to you today from Kelowna, BC, from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Selix First Nations. So as Margot laid out in my bio, there was a lot of pieces there, but my passion on top of my PhD work is the eradication of disability poverty. And it is an honor to be the co-chair of Disability Without Poverty, because it means I get to work with brilliant minds like Andrea, who is a beacon for disability pride in Alberta and now across the country. So thank you to Andrea and to Margot for the introductions today. Excuse me, I'm also recovering from COVID, so I have a little bit of a frog in my throat as well. I'm going to give you an introduction to what we mean by disability poverty, and then talk about the opportunity presented by the Canada Disability Benefit, and close by explaining what we've been doing at Disability Without Poverty. I know some of you have heard me talk before, so I'm going to combine some old messages with some new ones. Next slide, please. So you may have heard about this Canada Disability Benefit, a new benefit that was first proposed by the federal government in the throne speech in September 2020. Since then, there have been a number of commitments. There was money set aside in the spring budget of 2021. By the summer of 2021, we had a bill, C-35, but the election came along and wiped that away. We then had considerable attention in various election platforms, which was really encouraging, obviously, particularly the Liberal election platform as they came to form the minority government. And on International Day for People with Disabilities, both Minister Qualtrough and the Prime Minister made statements saying that the benefit will happen. And behind the scenes, we know that there's been work going on with various roundtables and to get the opinions of people in many sectors, disabled people and organizations of disabled people. However, disabled people who live in poverty need action now. They lived in poverty before the pandemic. It got worse during the pandemic. And now we have soaring inflation, but no alteration to rates of disability assistance payments that these people need to survive. I think we're running out of words to describe the depth of this crisis. Next slide, please. So I want to take you on a small journey to introduce you to disability poverty. Imagine a group of 100 Canadians, young, old, from coast to coast, representing the rich diversity of this country. I see them talking, laughing, sharing photos of their families. Maybe someone has a ball and a game breaks out. 10 of those Canadians live in poverty. Sure, they're probably still joining in, and you might not even know which 10 it is, but they live with the daily stress of not knowing how they're going to feed their family or keep a roof over their head, or any of the other major issues that come with living in poverty. Next slide, please. Out of those 10 Canadians, 4 of them are disabled. On top of their concerns for food, clothing, and shelter, they can't afford to pay for vital medications, the care they need, or the medical devices they rely on to function. When we look at the statistics more closely, we see that 22% of Canadians are disabled, but they make up 41% of the group of people who live in poverty. They're overrepresented. There's twice as many disabled people in the group than statistics alone would account for. Next slide, please. Most disabled people who live in poverty rely on assistance from either federal, provincial, or territorial governments if they're eligible at all. The assistance from these programs is way below the poverty line. The 52 poverty lines that currently make up Canada's official poverty line. For example, if you live in Vancouver, the provincial disability assistance is $1,358.50, but the official poverty line is $2,028. Whereas in St. John's, Newfoundland, the assistance rate is $904, whereas the official poverty line is $1,867. Travel north to Iqaluit, and you'll find that the assistance rate is $1,019, but the official poverty line hasn't been calculated for none of it yet. It's the last of the territories for that to happen. But we know that groceries are out of sync with the rest of the country, with orange juice costing on any given day $26, and a jar of pasta sauce $13 on the day that I happen to look up some prices. Next slide, please. So at Disability Without Poverty, we believe that the promise that this Canada Disability benefit is too big to be left to government to do on their own. This benefit has to actually benefit the people who need it. It has to make those major systemic changes to allow it to happen. It has to be designed with the close cooperation of disabled people. Next slide, please. This isn't something that only disabled people believe in, though. In the summer of 2021, we commissioned an Angus Reid survey so that we could learn where Canadians stand on these issues. We found that 9 out of 10 Canadians favour a Canada Disability benefit, and that the strongest support came from Quebec. 88% of people agreed with the statement, a Canada Disability benefit is an essential commitment for the government to make. It's time the country came together to end disability poverty. Those who spend time around me have heard me say many times that I really wonder about those other 12% people who don't believe in ending disability poverty. And I'm going to hope that they just hit the wrong button, because I like to believe that nobody could believe that a disabled person should live in poverty. Next slide, please. So Disability Without Poverty is a relatively new movement. We came together after that throne speech in 2020. We believe that no disabled person in Canada should live in poverty, and we're going to work as hard as we possibly can to do something about that. Next slide, please. So last year was very busy. We came together as a leadership group of disabled people to chart the course that we wanted to take. We wrote as many op-eds as the media would publish, and we talked and talked to anyone who would listen. And we also made sure that we got right to the top of the government systems that can make this change happen. Next slide, please. As we move on from our first year, we are now getting really focused. We know the task ahead. Every day at the moment, I hope we're going to get word that the bill has been tabled. We know that there are many other pieces to this work and that Michael and Brent are going to talk about some of them. But we must be a focused disability movement to make this happen. So, my last slide, please. I want to leave you by explaining about how we believe the disability movement has created a wave of momentum that we hope is going to make this change happen. So we started a media campaign during the last election to make sure that disability poverty was an issue that was talked about. After the election, when we were in the period where the government was settling into its new business, we wrote a letter that we wanted to get the signatures of 100 Canadians on. And we got 200, including prominent politicians like former Senator Art Eggleton, and authors like Tara Moss. People were reaching out because they wanted to be part of something more. So we began a parliamentary e-petition sponsored by Green MP Mike Morris. It got almost 18,000 signatures, even though our timing was over the Christmas period, because we wanted it to be read in Parliament when the new session began, which Mike did on February the 10th. As that was happening, a letter was written and signed by 43 senators, all asking for the Canada Disability Benefit to be fast-tracked. Then later on in March, the MS Society, one of our partners, began its own petition, not a parliamentary one that they're going to present next week. And on the first day alone, it got 10,000 signatures. Then Mike Morris started an MP's letter. And now that's at roughly 80 signatures, including the whole of the Bloc Québécois. And they didn't mention anything about supports for disabled people in their election platform, the only party not to do that. And at the same time, hopefully you have seen on social media that we're pushing a hashtag where's the bill, so that we can give people the materials to contact their own MPs asking, where's the bill? And so that we are gradually building this momentum. It's hard work. It's a drip effect, and you just never know what's going to be successful. But we are determined. We cannot let disabled people face 6.7% inflation with no increases to their assistance payments without shouting about this in the loudest way we can. So that was my time to give you an introduction. As the warm-up as I pass you on to Michael Prince.
Thanks, Michelle. I want to say that as a co-chair for Disability Without Poverty, there's no option to not build momentum. And so that includes all of you, right? That includes all of you that are here today taking part in this conversation. So we're grateful to have everyone here. For Dr. Michael Prince. So Michael joined the University of Victoria in 1987 as the inaugural Lansdowne Professor of Social Policy in the Faculty of Human and Social Development. He's also an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Political Science and the Faculty of Social Science at the University of Victoria. As a policy consultant, Dr. Prince has been an advisor to various federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal government agencies, 4 royal commissions, and to a number of parliamentary committees, both federally and provincially. An active volunteer, Michael has been a board member of a community health clinic, a legal aid society, and a hospital society foundation, the BC Association of Community Living. As well, he's currently a member of the Social Policy Committee to the Council of Canadiens with Disabilities, the Income Security Advisory Committee to Inclusion Canada, and a member of the Registered Disability Savings Plan Action Group to the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, Government of British Columbia. Michael also serves on the Ministerial Disability Advisory Group to the Honorable Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion for the Government of Canada. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Andrea, and welcome everyone. I'm speaking to you today from my office at the University of Victoria here on Vancouver Island, and I want to acknowledge with much gratitude that I work and live on the traditional unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Salish First Nations here in southern Vancouver Island. So thank you to you, Andrea, and thank you to Margot and the Voice of Albertans with Disabilities for this invitation, this opportunity to talk about this important policy reform, the Canada Disability Benefit. So in my contribution to this conversation today, I want to focus on what I'm calling the governmental agendas. That's the Government of Canada's plan and agenda on moving forward with such a disability benefit. What makes it a public priority, even though at times it may not feel like that for many Canadians with disabilities at the moment, and what kind of social policy change will it likely be? What does it represent in terms of a shift or a change in direction in how we provide income assistance or financial support to people living with disabilities in Canada? So if we go to the next slide, please. This is just an observation or a reminder that the Government of Canada, as we're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are still not quite out of it yet, but the government has quite a crowded, and Parliament has quite a crowded agenda, packed with multiple issues. Many of them are very complex, many of them long-standing. There are some opportunities in that agenda as well. And so on this slide, I'm just reminding us of some of the major announcements on legislation and on tax policy and on programming that the Trudeau federal government has been announcing in recent months or in the last year or so, whether that's to do with housing and housing affordability and homelessness, climate action and environmental issues, of course, dental care, which was announced in the most recent federal budget earlier this month. Discussion still around pharmacare as an unfulfilled promise of a healthcare system. And then there's some interesting or important policy reviews going on right now that clearly involve and concern people with disabilities across the country. There's a current review of the medical assistance in dying sections of the Criminal Code of Canada and the legislation on that. Minister Qualtrough, in some of her other responsibilities, is also undertaking a review of the employment insurance program, and including things around sickness benefit and how to provide better eligibility or protection by the program for employment insurance for part-time workers. And that clearly would be of great significance to many Canadians with disabilities. There's also a review of the Employment Equity Act in Canada, which again, Canadians with disabilities are one of the 4 designated equity groups named in that legislation, alongside women, Indigenous peoples, and people from visible minorities or racialized communities. And so again, there's many other issues I could have added there, but just to make the point that trying to navigate through this Canada Disability Benefit is through a Parliament and a government that has quite a long list of other issues, and many of them demanding great attention and interest and funding. So the challenge, of course, that Michelle laid out quite nicely in her opening remarks, challenge for the disability community and the wider movement is to how to widen the support, how to get the message out, how to continue to lobby and to get the message out there consistently and persistently. Of some concern to many Canadians with disabilities and the advocacy movement was that the Canada Disability Benefit was not mentioned at all in the latest federal budget that was unveiled by Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland just about 3 weeks ago. Neither when we heard that the NDP and the Liberal parties had agreed to a formal working agreement that would keep this minority parliament going till presumably 2025, that the NDP would support the Liberal government on matters of the budget and on votes of non-confidence to provide some stability in this parliament. And there was a list of issues that the two parties had agreed to work on in moving forward and making this a productive and a sustainable parliament over the next 2 to 3 years. What was missing in that list was any mention of the Canada Disability Benefit. So that quite naturally raised a lot of anxieties and questions in people's minds as to, well, was this no longer a priority? Was this off the agenda? And as Michelle said, I think quite well, not necessarily. In fact, there has been a lot going on, as Michelle said, behind the scenes. In fact, in several arenas or areas. A lot of the focus right now is on Parliament and the parliamentary arena and getting that bill tabled in the House of Commons. There's also the arena of cabinet, the federal cabinet, and Minister Qualtrough's role in that cabinet and her getting the commitments through her cabinet and her caucus members in the Liberal Party in Parliament. There's also the Indigenous community, Indigenous organizations, which raises other issues of access and eligibility. And then there's, of course, in Canada, there's never too far away the question of federal-provincial relations and how will this new benefit fit within the existing array and complex patchwork of federal and provincial income programs and supports. And so there has been behind the scenes some meetings already between senior officials at the federal and provincial levels, and a few meetings between Minister Qualtrough and her provincial counterparts, who are ministers responsible for social services and disability issues in the provincial and territorial governments. And of course, there's other allies in other movements, whether it's the women's movement or the broader poverty movement, that also play a key role in this. So there's a lot, there is a lot going on, although sometimes it may not seem to be that case. And fingers crossed, I'm hoping that the bill will be tabled in the House of Commons in the next few weeks, but certainly before June. And that will then kick off the more formal parliamentary process as we move forward. Next slide, please. So even though the Canada Disability Benefit was not mentioned in the latest federal budget and did not figure in the working agreement between the NDP and the Liberals, we should not conclude that that means it's off the agenda or it's no longer an issue of importance. I would argue that, in fact, it is very much a public priority and a political priority. And what makes it that is, in this slide, is three different kind of dimensions. There's tremendous legitimacy around the idea and concept of a Canada Disability Benefit. Just to remind you, as Michelle did, it's a commitment that's been identified in previous budgets and throne speeches. And we did see a bill tabled last year, and a new one will be tabled again soon. In the mandate letter that the Prime Minister issues to every cabinet minister, the one to Minister Qualtrough, again, specifically instructs Minister Qualtrough to oversee the introduction and implementation of a Canada Disability Benefit in her role as the minister responsible. And again, as Michelle so well demonstrated, there's a clear, long-standing need for many, many people in the disability population in this country for adequate, important financial assistance. The feasibility of this idea is that there's already a great deal that the Canadian government does around disability issues. This is not a new field and a new area. And in designing the program, we already have a number of existing programs, whether it's for seniors of low income or for families with young children, where the government of Canada is delivering income-tested benefits to eradicate, prevent, or reduce poverty. And there's no doubt there's the administrative capacity within the federal public service to deliver such a program. So this is not a brand new, untested, unknown, unfamiliar policy idea. And as Michelle said, with in terms of the Angus Reid poll and other evidence, there's clearly both political interest and public popularity around this. You add those three things together: legitimacy, feasibility, and popularity, and those are pretty strong ingredients for making this a serious priority that will go ahead, will move forward. So I'm very optimistic and quite confident that this is not going to slide off the agenda or be ignored. If we go to the next slide, please. The question here is, well, what kind of social change is this about? This is not a universal basic income for all Canadians. This is a targeted program for people with disabilities. And one of the big questions around the change will be, how will eligibility be defined? How will disability be defined to determine who will be eligible or not? This is an innovation in the sense that we will be introducing a new program, a new income supplement at the federal level to, at present, an unknown number. We don't know yet how many Canadians with disabilities will qualify for this. The government has indicated in statements that it's intended for what they are referring to as working age people with disabilities. That typically means people of ages 18 to 64, which raises questions of what does that leave, or what does that mean for younger youth and children living with disabilities, and for seniors or people 65 and over living with disabilities? How will this new benefit then interrelate or articulate with these other age groups and categories? So it is an innovation, a new program, but it's largely evolutionary, not revolutionary. It's evolutionary in the sense that it's being inserted into an already existing array or landscape of many programs. The Government of Canada said the intention is not to replace or eliminate other programs. And so the challenge then is, how does the new program fit into all these existing programs, which have very different eligibility rules and coverage and delivery systems? The goal is to fill a gap in the income security system. It's not to address supports or services in the healthcare or education or housing or social services area, although of course it will have many implications for how people access or qualify for those other benefits. And there's a lot of familiar elements of design in this program proposal that are available in other areas. But these are this slide shows a lot of the items for conversation and discussion that once a bill is tabled in the House of Commons, and probably in the fall, this September, October, November, when House of Commons Committee will hold hearings, that's when disability movements like Disability Without Poverty and other organizations and families and communities will come forward with what will need to be pretty clear, specific answers to a lot of questions as to how the program will be designed. So how evolutionary will it be? How dynamic or new will it be? How comprehensive will it be? How adequate will it be? Those are all key questions yet to be determined, and the conversations are important to be had right now and through the summer and into the fall. This, just because it's an evolutionary and not a radical change, does not mean that there's not the potential for transformation. And if we go to the next slide, please, I asked, if we go back one, please. Thank you. Here I asked the question, can the Canada Disability Benefit advance what we sometimes call a paradigm shift in disability income policy? And by paradigm shift, we mean a major transformation, a major shift in the way we think about how we support people with disabilities in terms of financial assistance. And my answer is that in the short to medium term, so the next few years to 3 or 4 or 5 years out, it's not likely that the Canada Disability Benefit is going to be a revolutionary or a radical change to the way we deliver income support in this country. It's more likely to be evolutionary. But there are elements within it, or could be within it, that promise potential for some significant change over time. And I just want to highlight three here that are potential, what might be called game changers or paradigm shifters. One is, what definition of disability will be adopted for purposes of determining eligibility for the program? And if we move away from some of the old existing, more medical, narrower, more restrictive definitions, we have the potential here to move towards a far more social model, inclusive, comprehensive, a way of addressing eligibility. That could be a game changer over time. Another one is how we recognize the costs, the additional costs in particular of living with a disability, in how the benefit amount is actually set. And again, there's some opportunities there to be much more expansive, progressive, and shifting the way we've done this for decades, if not for a century or longer. And also in how we include the treatment of earnings, any kind of employment income, and even beyond that, other assets that people may have. If that is done in again, a more modern, progressive, generous way, that has the potential of, again, shifting the way we think and way we deliver programs. But my conclusion right now is that as long as our general approach in this country continues to be relying primarily on provincial, territorial, and First Nation social assistance programs as the main way of delivering financial support to people with disabilities, that then this is not going to be a radical or revolutionary or transformational change. It will continue to constrain the ability of the Canada Disability Benefit to be a paradigm shift. So as one of my friends said when I shared this slide with him, he said, well, what I hear you saying, Michael, is that the Canada Disability Benefit could have the promise of being a midway point in creating a better Canada, as opposed to being the end of the journey in itself. And I think that's a fair and optimistic way of thinking about how this new disability benefit could help contribute to a significant transformation and improvement in the lives of Canadians with disabilities. Last slide is simply a thank you, and I look forward to Brent's presentation and any time we may have for any general conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prince. So I was writing all kinds of notes while you were speaking there, and the words that you were sharing: legitimacy, feasibility, popularity. When you say those words, I think of the connecting words for me are optimism and action. So, yeah, political interest and speaking about working age. So I think that it's important for us to put ourselves in those people's shoes to see what our monthly amounts we receive, and would we be able to live on the amounts that many Albertans with disabilities receive. So in Alberta, assured income for the severely handicapped, AISH, is $1,685. And so although the benefit itself won't be a radical change to make it happen, I think that the large amount of change would be in several $100s, because now the monthly shortfall is anywhere between $200 and $300. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and thank you for the presentation. I'd like to now introduce Mr. Brent Page. Brent often finds himself of two minds, holding two titles. One as March of Dimes Canada's Associate Director for Community Programs, and the other as the Executive Director of the Stroke Recovery Association of British Columbia, SRABC. SRABC is an affiliate of After Stroke, a program of March of Dimes. Brent has been involved in disability service provision and inclusion advocacy since first volunteering, then working for the Canadian Red Cross in the late 1970s. Brent wrote the Canadian Red Cross position paper on the accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act and sat on the Government of Ontario's Built Environment Standards Development Committee that worked to harmonize the AODA with the Ontario Building Code. He was also a committee member of Barrier Free BC, which advocated for the BC Legislative Assembly to enact a strong, effective, and enforceable Accessible British Columbia Act. Brent's work intersects programs and initiatives that include assistive technology, community development, advocacy, and post-stroke community reintegration. Brent has an honors bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto in history and international law and obtained a certification as a quality manager for the University of Manitoba and the American Society for Quality. Brent acknowledges he lives and works on the unceded Coast Salish territories, the traditional ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsleil-Waututh. He can be found most days cycling, kayaking, or running along the seawall in Vancouver when not volunteering time to his passions of history, the arts, and architecture. Thank you for being here, Brent.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Michael and Michelle. It's great to be here. I'm looking up because there's actually an eagle flying right downtown here right now. American bald eagle, go figure. I think I'd just like to start by reinforcing what we've been talking about on land acknowledgements, and I would invite all of us to reflect on the land that supports your participation or your employer's participation in our virtual space today. Let's head to the next slide. March of Dimes is committed to advocating for financial security for people with disabilities as one of the pillars of our new 3-year strategic plan, Champion Equity and Empowerability. In fact, we see financial security as not just a pillar, but a foundation that underlines everything else. Without access to livable income, people with disabilities cannot thrive. They just keep scraping by to survive. For far too long, people with disabilities have experienced an endemic of disability poverty due to systemic discrimination, barriers to employment, and the high cost of living with a disability, which of course, as we know, has been challenged because of our interest rates at the moment. We see the proposed Canada Disability Benefit as a once-in-a-generation opportunity toward ending disability poverty in Canada, and as a step in the right direction towards financial security for people with disabilities who currently live with precarity and uncertainty. For this reason, the CDB is a major focus of our advocacy work, as we want to take advantage of this unique window of opportunity. As part of this advocacy, we are proud to be part of the Partners Table with Disability Without Poverty, working alongside Michelle and others who are leading this important movement for financial security. We know that many members of the disability community were disappointed that the benefit did not feature in the 2022 federal budget, as Michael was speaking about. We too were disappointed that the federal government didn't take this opportunity to communicate their progress on the benefit. March of Dimes President and CEO Len Baker met with Minister Qualtrough in late March to discuss the benefit and other issues, and heard from her that the benefit remains a top priority, with work well underway behind the scenes by the public service. We also know that federally funded grassroots consultations will soon be underway on the Disability Inclusion Action Plan, including the financial security pillar, which focuses on the benefit. This work is being led by Independent Living Canada and Muscular Dystrophy, and as some of you probably know, Inclusion Canada is the lead on the financial security pillar. For this reason, we see the budget as a missed opportunity to acknowledge the ongoing efforts towards the benefit, rather than an indication that the benefit has been overlooked. We are working from a position that the benefit will be implemented and that we need to continue to push it forward and continue to shape it to meet the community's needs. In our advocacy work on the CDB, we have a few main priorities, and I'm going to talk about these in the next couple slides. Next slide, please. First, provincial clawbacks. It's important to us that this benefit does not does do what it's supposed to do. When combined with existing benefits and supports, it should provide a basic livable income that actually helps lift people out of poverty. Minister Qualtrough has been clear. Her expectation is that the CDB is meant to be a supplement to existing benefits, not a replacement. This means that we need the provinces and territories to play nice with the federal government. In Alberta, the CDB, once available, must be supplemented by AISH. The provincial government should not claw back any existing benefits that Albertans with disabilities already have. It is important that we start advocating provincially now so that Albertans with disabilities actually experience the full impact of this new federal benefit when it becomes available. Marche has written to every provincial and territorial minister responsible for disability assistance, letting them know our expectation that they will not claw back benefits. We will continue to advocate on this issue. We also need to continue to tell the federal government that they must embed this requirement in the CDB legislation itself, rather than leaving it up to the provincial decision-making systems, as they did with the CERB. Next slide, please. Interface and access. Once the CDB is in place, it's very important to us at Marche that there are no barriers to eligible recipients receiving it. Right now, it is well documented that the existing federal disability benefits receive incredibly low uptake. For example, it's estimated that only 40% of eligible people in Canada receive a disability tax credit because there are so many barriers to accessing it, not to mention, of course, the indignities of the medical model that it follows. For people with disabilities, navigating systems to access government benefits and services that they are entitled to can become a full-time job in itself. In introducing a new federal income benefit, Marche wants the federal government to use this opportunity to develop a world-class, inclusive, and simplified user interface and access point to the benefit. What do we mean by this? So how does someone actually access the benefit? How do they apply? Who helps them? And what does the user journey look like? We envision a one-window approach where every person with a disability living with low income can receive personalized, fully accessible support to apply for and access the benefit, as well as referrals to other benefits and programs for which they're eligible. We are currently working on research in this area to understand the best practices for access to disability benefits in other jurisdictions around the world. And as we progress, we will be looking to collaborate with stakeholders from across the country to gain further insights and perspectives on what an accessible interface looks like. We'll be sharing our findings with the federal government and urging them to take this opportunity to build the best model possible. The status quo is not good enough. Once the benefit is in place, Parliament will have decided that people are entitled to these resources. If the federal government does not encourage uptake and ensure that every eligible person with a disability receives the benefit, then their job is not finished. And they need to keep working until everyone who is eligible has access. Next slide, please. Finally, employment. As one of Canada's largest providers of employment services for people with disabilities, it is important to us at Marche that the CDB does not disincentivize employment. We recognize that employment is not a goal for everyone, for people with disabilities, but for people with disabilities who can and want to work, they should be able to access the benefit, and it shouldn't be a deterrent to them. As we know from existing provincial disability assistance programs, these programs can be often quite punitive for people who earn employment income. There are many reasons why people may have access to employment income at some times and not others. Perhaps they have an episodic disability, or perhaps the sector where they work is precarious and so their income is not stable. Disability benefits such as the CDB need to be flexible to respond to the complex, varied and changing circumstances of people with disabilities' lives. This means that the earned income threshold should be high, rapid re-enrollment should be offered, and that person-centered service, including appropriate referrals to employment programs, are available. This will conclude my presentation, and I want to thank you for attending. I want to thank my fellow panelists, Michael and Michelle. And of course, I want to thank you all for being here, and of course, our great organizers.
I can answer one of the questions that came up. So one of the questions that came up is, how do we join the Disability Without Poverty movement? So a great place to start is disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca. That's our website where we keep current news. There's a newsletter you can sign up for. We've actually just doing some revamping of the website, so there'll be an Alberta specific page. You can also reach out directly to me. So Andrea at disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca. There's Facebook, Instagram, and then the one we're working on really hard right now is Where's the Bill? So hashtag Where's the Bill? There's a song coming out by a hip hop artist named Jay Ross, where he sings a song that forever gets in your head. So we'll share it with everyone when it comes out, and reach out at any time and share your stories with us. And I'm happy to speak with you and to take part in today.
So hashtag Where's the Bill? Stuck in my brain forever.
Yes.
If you don't mind, I've been having a discussion with Shelley Petit from New Brunswick about aspects of things, and I want to kind of put Michael into this. So Shelley has been talking about an MOU that's on the table with New Brunswick. Are you aware of any MOUs that are specifically relate to the Canada Disability Benefit at the moment?
No.
Or no, me
No.
neither. So
No.
Shelley, I wonder if you're talking about the general accessibility one to do with the Accessible Canada Act, but Michael's ear is closer. My ear can be close to the top, but Michael's ear is even closer. So, I think when we're talking about MOUs at the moment, we're simply not in that place at all. But Shelley, please get in touch. I would love to continue this discussion with you and Michael and Brent about all things related to it. And the other thing that Shelley brought up is the way that this supplement could actually happen. Shelley has she's just written again, several MPs clearly said this MOU will open up the ability for the CDB.
Yeah, well, don't rule it out.
Would love to know more. It would be very useful to all of us that are working on this. And yeah, my email is michelle@disabilitywithoutpoverty.ca. So please get in touch. But one of the other points that Shelley brought up that I think is really important is to do with how much and how and who gets what. And I think this speaks to that transitional nature of this evolution that Michael had talked about so eloquently. So, Shelley, you mentioned in the comments that she made that I know everybody not everybody can see them, that for it to be a fixed amount is not quite fair, because even when I showed the difference between Vancouver and St. John's, Newfoundland, and Andrea talked about Alberta, the amounts there, and then we add into that CPPD and veterans benefits, the amounts are all different. And one of the things that we really didn't get into is how much disability costs, right? And, Michael's heard me talk about this before. We don't have data on this in Canada. We can only go on some rough estimates from international pieces that kind of might put it at 40%. So that's, so where this poverty line fits and how much money we need to genuinely lift people out of poverty. I keep saying we're not talking about unicorns and lollipops and rainbows here. We're just talking about people getting to the poverty line, right? So I think that I wonder, Michael, if you'd want to talk a little bit more about that, about how, how this is going to fit in, how we've been told it's a supplement, and how the chances of that changing, and
Yep.
All of those pieces.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about your the question coming from Shelley from New Brunswick and her mention of a memorandum of understanding. That could be an example of what will need to happen bilaterally, where particularly provinces that do not have specific disability income assistance programs. British Columbia does, Alberta does, Saskatchewan does, Ontario does,
Manitoba does.
Yeah, Manitoba. You go east of Ontario and it's a different landscape. So the question is that New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and I think Newfoundland and Labrador do not have the same kind of, like here in BC, we can say very quickly, there's 123,000 people on disability income assistance right now this month. Boom. And we know what the screening eligibility is. You can't say that in 3 or 4 other provinces. And so what will need to happen is the federal government will need to negotiate formal agreements or MOUs, whatever you want to call them, how disability eligibility will be determined for people who are on provincial programs to qualify for this federal supplement. So that might be what Shelley's talking about, or what might be going on. And as you can imagine, there's clearly a strong incentive for provinces, particularly those that provide lower levels of support. And again, that's in Eastern Canada, more so than in Western Canada. Tremendous incentive to make a deal. And so, and if it's a government that's, open to that, and you've got strong federal ministers like Dominic LeBlanc and others in New Brunswick that help facilitate that. So that's, when you think about the history of social policy in Canada, that's often the way it happens. We think about the guaranteed income supplement, which sometimes gets mentioned as the exemplar or template for this benefit. Well, that was originally thought to be a temporary program because it wouldn't be needed as people got pensions and better retirement saving, and people like you, Michelle and Brent and Andrew. No, well, it's a permanent program, and it actually serves about 40% of seniors. So we still, need it. But what also happened was that when that was brought in, within 10 years, 6 provinces added on top of the guaranteed income supplement their own additional supplements. Mm-hmm. So we got a supplement on the supplement in certain provinces. So that could happen in this story as well. We could see, now again, it raises problems of equity because not all provinces will have the financial capacity or ability or interest to do so. But we could see, so again, let's be bold, let's be imaginative, let's push. So I'm intrigued by the New Brunswick development. But you're right, the question of eligibility, and the ministers made no secret of it. This is a targeted program. It's income tested. It will not be for 4 or 5 or 6 million Canadians with disabilities. It probably won't even be for 2 million Canadians with disabilities. It's a question of what the population will be. And that, again, the movement needs to bring some real specifics to that to make that as concrete and real as possible. Because at some point, dollar numbers will be talked about. That people in Treasury Board and finance departments will do what they do, which is always worry about costs. And we're seeing a federal government that's trying to reduce their deficit, trying to retreat from a lot of the pandemic programs. Here, we're trying to swim against the tide, saying, introduce a new income program that's permanent. Well, people like Minister Freeland saying, we're getting rid of this one's temporary, don't worry, we're going to pull that one. So we're like the mighty salmon who are trying to go up the river while the water's flowing the other way. So the more we can, make this concrete and feasible. I like what Andrea said. She heard words, when I said legitimacy or popularity or feasibility, she heard words like action, optimism, possibilities. We've got to convince people this is not only the right thing to do, but it's going to be an important thing to do, and it's doable. Yeah. It's doable. It's not going to break anyone's bank. It's not going to frighten people. And as Brent rightly said, you link it to the extent we can to employment ideas, and then it isn't just handing out cash, which again, some Canadians will be worried about. It's about investing in people, whether that's through community inclusion, social participation, quality of life, paid work, what have it. what have you, right? Full citizenship in all its dimension. I'll stop there because I know I'm going to eat up all your time.
So
Sorry.
Michelle, it looks like you had a final comment, and then I'll just wrap up the hour.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say there's a very simple calculation there, Michael. The number of people times the amount of the equals the budget, and you alter any one of those variables, right? And we as a disability, we've got a community, we've got to work on what we believe in those things. And, you know, and I think as well, Brent, as you talked about, you know, what we hear, and you use the words disincentives to work, you know, for me, I see those as our dear old frenemy ableism, because who else gets talked about in this way, that we go to work and we earn money, but we can have it taken away from us for what reasons, right? And so I think, you know, as Michael laid out, this bill, when it, you know, this benefit presents such opportunity. There are so many things that we can finally get right. Individualization, so that people have the freedom to have their own income for the whole of their lives. You know, and who gets money and who gets to do what with it, and what happens to your EI, where, as I keep saying, the I is insurance. You paid for that. You paid for your CPPD, right? So, you know, there is a lot of work to be done. I'm so excited by the work that we've heard recently that's being done by Inclusion Canada on the DAP pillar. And I hope over the next 2 months, all of you, when you hear the consultations that are going to be taking place, that you all get a chance to participate and give your thoughts on it. Tell what you really, really want to have happen. And we'll all work as hard as we possibly can. Thank you, everybody. I could talk long and hard, but
thank you for that bridge to the final wrap up. The motto that someone was speaking at the beginning of the chat in the box says, "Together we hold the power," which is the Voice of Albertans with Disabilities motto. But that cannot be realized without all of us working together. Spread the word, host webinars in your community, call your government representatives, be loud and be proud. And let's just get this done. So thank you to Michelle, Michael, and Brent for your passion. I can see that, and wisdom. Thank you to the attendees, and especially thank you to our sign language interpreters and CART, both en français and English. And thank you to Disability Without Poverty for this opportunity to collaborate. And remember, as you walk away from this, that together we do hold the power.
Here. Well said. Thanks, everyone.